Hi all and welcome. I'm Mermaid and this is the history of fairy tales. The first written fairy tale was written by a French author by the name of Charles Perrault in 1697. However, fairy tales have been told through the word of mouth for way longer than that. In fact, scholars have discovered that the telling of fairy tales through word of mouth dates back all the way to the 9th century. That's the 800s. The very first fairy tale that Perrault decided to write was the story of Little Red Riding Hood, and his first audience that he read it to was a group of women. In the original version of Little Red Riding Hood, written by Perrault, it is basically the same as we know it today, except for the end. In the end, the wolf ends up eating Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, and they die. Charles decided to read this book to a group of women because the moral of the story applied to them. The moral was that men are bad and will take advantage of you if given the chance. However, when the story was rewritten by the Brothers Grimm, a woodsman was added to the story to save Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, and the three of them brutally murdered the wolf. Ever since then, the story has been changed and added to until it became the story we know of today. Now, moving on. As I briefly mentioned before, the Brothers Grimm also wrote fairy tales. They took the fairy tales that Perrault wrote and gave them their own little twist, making them extremely grim and dark. Although nowadays fairy tales are told to children, the Brothers Grimm originally wrote the fairy tales so dark and grim that their intended audience was adults. However, the books they wrote were not selling, so they decided to let parents buy the books for their children. As it turns out, the fairy tales were very useful for parents, as the dark and grim nature of the stories helped them keep their children in line, as the children didn't want to end up like the characters in their favorite stories. The most popular fairy tales written by the Brothers Grimm were Hansel and Gretel and Cinderella. However, they weren't anything like they are today. In the original Hansel and Gretel, written by the Brothers Grimm, Hansel and Gretel are left outside in the woods far away from home by their stepmother, because their stepmother wanted them dead as they were starving, and hoped that once they were gone, she would get more food. On the first night, they managed to find their way back home because Hansel had left a trail of rocks that glowed in the moonlight. The second night, Hansel tried to make a trail with breadcrumbs, but the birds ate it. As the two wandered around the woods, they came across a house of candy where the witch tried to eat them, but instead they burned her alive. After that, Hansel and Gretel eventually found their way home with the help of some forest animals and lived happily ever after with their father after they stole the witch's jewels. Nowadays, the story is similar but less dark and grim, as Hansel and Gretel just get lost in the woods and eventually find their way home after defeating the witch. Just like Hansel and Gretel, Cinderella was also rewritten by the Brothers Grimm. The story is mainly the same like Hansel and Gretel was, but with much darker aspects.
Careful, my toe!
Darling, I know!
What'll we do?
It'll have to go, but when you're his bride, you can sit or ride. You'll never need to walk!
After Cinderella put the glass slipper on, the crows pecked out their eyes until they were blind. I guess the Brother Grimm fairy tales really live up to their name of being really grim. As we can see, over the years, these fairy tales have traveled from word of mouth from the 9th century to written form in the 1600s, where they were very dark and grim, all the way to the light-hearted fairy tales we know today. In fact, some of these well-known fairy tales, such as Cinderella and Little Red Riding Hood, have been turned into movie adaptations. Production company Disney has made many of our favorite fairy tales into movie adaptations. Some of these fairy tales even giving live-action versions of them, in cases such as Cinderella and the Little Mermaid. Some have even been turned into plays or merged together, such as the play and movie called Into the Woods, which combines Cinderella, Rapunzel, Jack and the Giant Beanstalk, and Little Red Riding Hood into one giant fairy tale. All fairy tales have been adapted through time until this point today, where they are the fairy tales we know and love. And that is everything I have for today. I hope to see you all next time, and please like, share, and subscribe. Every little bit helps. Bye-bye!